great teacher, Dr. Professor Dr. Malhar Kulkarni. So before I introduce him to you, let me just welcome him to our session. We also have with us the President of SSASP, Shri Dilip Karambelkar ji, Executive President, Dr. Kala Acharya ma'am. In addition to that, we also have amongst our speakers whom we have heard earlier and whom we will be hearing soon, Dr. Sriram Agashe, Dr. Kanchan Mande, Dr. Ranjana Naigaonkar, and some of our regular people who have been attending very sincerely. We also have with us Shri Rajendra Datar sir, who has been in this field of Sanskrit for a very long time. So I welcome everybody on behalf of Sanskriti Samvardhan and Samshodhan Pratishthan. And I am happy to introduce and of course welcome to all those of us who are watching us online on YouTube as well as on Facebook. So welcome to all of you. I begin with a small introduction of a great personality. Like in Sanskrit Sahitya, there is little known of the author often, but more is known from their work. And so it is with our speaker today, Professor Dr. Malhar Kulkarni. He is a great educator of Sanskrit grammar. And I am specifying this because he is a professor at the Humanities Department in IIT Mumbai. Yes, for those of us who are not aware, IIT does house a Department of Humanities where Sanskrit is taught. And we have an eminent grammarian and a great teacher in Dr. Malhar Kulkarni sir. He has to his credit a lot of books, more than 100 papers and a lot of publications. He is a very coveted speaker in the international and national forums on Sanskrit. He has to his credit also 10 students who have finished their PhD and there are 7 who are pursuing. And like I said, a great personality, but less is known. Needless to say, he has several awards to his credit as well. So today, we are not going to have Dr. Malhar Kulkarni speaking on grammar, but on another topic where he will speak extremely well to all of us, and I'm sure all of us will be interested in knowing. He will be speaking on manuscriptology today. So I welcome Professor Dr. Malhar Kulkarni ji to please present your lecture on manuscriptology. We have about 45 minutes of talk time, after which we can have some time for questions. And then Dr. Kala Acharya ma'am will conclude the session. So over to you, Professor Dr. Malhar Kulkarni.
Dhanyavad. Thank you so much. At the outset, I thank this prestigious institution, Sanskriti Samvardhana Samshodhana Pratishthan, and for inviting me to deliver this lecture. This is a very important activity they have undertaken called Sanskritotsav, in which they have invited eminent scholars from all over the world to speak on various subjects. Therefore, I congratulate this institution and all the dignitaries, all the office bearers of this institution. Notably, our respected Madam Kala Acharya ji and also Dilip Karambelkar ji. I thank them from the bottom of my heart, first of all, in undertaking this activity. And I also thank Dr. Ruchita for generously introducing me. Now I will begin my presentation and I will share my screen with you. There is also a small presentation of a tool that we have developed. If time permits, I will do that as well. That comes only at the end. At that point of time, I may have to stop sharing and restart sharing. So please bear with me at that
Sudha,
point of time.
nobody will be in kitchen now. Come out of kitchen. Don't do anything.
Oh, Now what happened? Let's put this. Yeah. Is the screen visible to all of you? I hope it is. Okay.
The screen is visible.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I also, before I begin, I also salute all my teachers and all my elders in the audience. So this is a presentation on manuscriptology, also known as Hastalikhita Shastra, also known as Pandulipi Vijnana in Hindi. What we shall do in this presentation is try to get acquainted with certain basic concepts and certain features of this particular discipline. So first of all, let us deal with the question, what is manuscriptology? And the answer is the science that processes manuscripts. What is this process of processing? The processing of manuscripts can be divided into following heads, namely collection, cataloging, and editing. Collection involves actual collection and then preservation. Cataloging involves accounting for the manuscript material with various types of related physical as well as intellectual information. And we shall go into the details of all these stages in a while. Editing involves processes that make the manuscript published. It brings the manuscript to light. These are some of the processes that are involved in this particular science, the science that is called manuscriptology. Now, what is a manuscript? Let us try to see how the National Mission for Manuscripts set in 2003 by the government of India to look after the manuscript situation in India. This is how they define what is a manuscript. A manuscript is a handwritten composition on paper or bark or cloth or metal or palm leaf or any other material dating back at least 75 years that has significant scientific, historical, or aesthetic value. That is what is a manuscript. We must reread this definition. I'll reread it for you. A manuscript is a handwritten composition. It should be a handwritten composition on paper. So these are the materials described on paper or bark or even a cloth or some metal or palm leaf or any other material that dates back at least 75 years, which has a significant scientific, historical, and aesthetic value. That is a manuscript. The manuscripts are distinct from historical records such as epigraphs on rocks, firmans, revenue records which provide direct information on events or processes in history. Manuscripts are different from them because they have knowledge content. So, National Mission for Manuscripts defines a manuscript in this particular way, very clear, very specific, which is a very good guideline even for us. Some may disagree to an extent with this definition. This is not the forum to talk about that disagreement. Let us accept this definition provided by the National Mission for Manuscripts and move ahead and try to understand this discipline better. According to the estimate of the Department of Culture, Government of India, there are approximately 5 million manuscripts available in India. Perhaps the biggest repository all over the world of manuscripts. So the texts that we know that are published currently can be said to be just the tip of the iceberg. There is a huge repository of works that is still lying unpublished in the form of manuscripts all over India in various repositories, and also obviously abroad. Now, this is an example of a manuscript that is presented to you on this slide number 4. This is a photocopy of the palm leaves that are preserved in Kerala. This is a Grantha manuscript of a text called Kashika Vritti. As you see, there are 3 folio taken together for one photocopy, and you will see that they are also broken at their ends. If you see the middle folio, it is broken in the left hand as well as right hand side. Whereas if you look at the bottommost folio, although it is not completely broken, but still there are some fragments that have got some marks which show that it is broken, and it is there to break any time. Good that we photocopied it at this moment. You will also see that there are 2 holes in each and every folio. They are the ones through which you put some thread and you bind all these palm leaves together. That is the purpose for these 2 small holes that are visible. Now, if you see, the photocopy is not extremely clear. So definitely this is a very good source for an ophthalmologist. So the point is, we have to strive hard to make the meaning to first of all read the characters and then make the meaning of what is written on these palm leaves. So you will see that we have written down certain notes, certain transcriptions in Devanagari and put some arrows to the portion that these Devanagari notings refer to in the manuscript. This is what you have to do when you read. Now, because this is a photocopy, we can afford making these comments. You will not be able to do this if you are handling an original manuscript. So we shall see the change in the scenario of preservation of manuscripts in a while. So the use of technology that provides us immense possibilities that we can do to better understand the content and as well as preserve these manuscripts. I'll show you some worst cases. So the next slide has this picture of a manuscript. On the left hand side, you see that it is broken and probably the middle part of the paper is not visible. So that much text we have lost. And also the right hand side folio has the right hand bottom portion cut. Even that is missing, so we have no information about what these letters are. So in this case, case, the editor will have to compare this manuscript with the other available manuscripts, and if there is no manuscript available, the editor will have to reconstruct on the basis of the material that is available. And when you read the edition, the editor will give the reconstructed words into square brackets. That is his own reconstruction, his own guess. Now, this manuscript is found in Kashmir region. This is written in Sharada characters, and you see that it is written on paper. See the condition of the paper, old condition, and with fragments inside. This is the situation which is normal situation that a researcher encounters when he hunts for manuscripts. This is how you get the manuscripts. You will have to encounter these difficulties and come up with the solutions to those. Now, which is the oldest manuscript of India? Some answers are provided. Babar manuscript, which has fragments of Navanitaka, a medical text, which was purchased by a British lieutenant called Hamilton Babar in March 1890 from northwestern China. That is considered as one of the oldest of the manuscripts of India. This is written in the late Brahmi script on birch bark, and the dates are roughly around 5th, 6th century CE. Currently, this manuscript is preserved in the Bodleian Library at Oxford, and you can get information about this also from Wikipedia. This is the picture of that particular manuscript available on the Wikipedia. One of the other oldest manuscripts is that of Parameshwara Tantra, a Shaiva Siddhanta text, which is written on palm leaves. This was composed, or this manuscript was written in 828 CE, 9th century CE. This is currently preserved by the University of Cambridge, UK. You see the preservation efforts, they are going on in countries outside India, and now also the government of India is heavily engaged in the preservation within India. So let us look at this. How does a manuscript come into existence? It can come into existence directly from the hand of the composer of any work. That is known as the direct copy of the work from the composer with the signature and so on. Or the manuscript could be a copy of either a direct work or another indirect copy of that direct work. Now, this hierarchical structure of a copy of an indirect copy of an indirect copy of an indirect copy of a direct work coming straight away from the pen of the author. Now, this creates a huge complex situation as far as Indian scenario is concerned, Indian manuscripts. For example, those who live in Mumbai, I am suggesting them to visit a particular place in Mumbai called a Jain Mandir, situated in Diamond Building in Charni Road. For example, to have a direct look at how manuscripts are copied down, how they have developed a mechanism to check how much information got copied and how it got validated, whether it was correct, whether somebody committed some mistake, and how that got rectified, and so on. So there are records that are kept, and the manuscripts are also stored. This is a very unique place available for all of us in Mumbai. We must visit this place. I myself visited, and I saw that there are the copyists, those who copy down the manuscripts, they also wear traditional clothes, the pagadi and that kind of dress that they wear traditionally, well, while writing, while copying down the manuscripts. They of course copy it down on papers sometimes and some other material also, but that is a very interesting process and that needs to be also studied. There are newspaper reports published about this place, and it is a very well known place. Yet we need to pay attention to this, and that will give us an idea how manuscripts used to be written at an earlier time. In the earlier age, where child marriages were in practice, where a lot of young women who, because of lack of medical, amenities, got widowed at an early young age, they were assigned this task of copying down a manuscript. And without knowing, of course, the content, many of them were not literate so much. Sorry, many of them were not learned. They were literate, but not too much learned in the particular discipline. So obviously, they copied down mechanically. And while doing so, they carried out several mistakes as well in their copying, and that is what makes the process of working on a manuscript extremely difficult. Is there a possibility now in this digital age to get manuscripts of this kind? My answer is yes, and I'll give you them from first-hand information, the manuscripts that I have seen. For example, let us take this modern example of a manuscript. In the city adjoining Mumbai called Thane, there was a teacher named Mrs. Prabha Chhatre. She passed away a few years ago. She translated the works of Professor S.D. Joshi, who worked on Panini in Marathi on paper, and she used plastic milk bags to preserve those handwritten pages. Of course, according to the definition of NMM, these pages will get the status of manuscripts only after 75 years of their composition. That means they will have to wait for another at least 50 years or so, or maybe 40 years or so, to get that status. So how will they look at that point of time? We can easily envisage that. The technology used, which is a simple homemade technology to use plastic milk bags to preserve these pages, completely deodored by using, we don't know what, but they preserve these pages quite elegantly. And when we had access to them, thanks to Mr. Chhatre, we could see that it was a very neat work. So a student of mine named Samhita Joshi cataloged this entire material, and now this entire material lies with the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute in Pune. These are the modern examples of manuscripts. How do you get a manuscript? Well, I'll give you a very concrete example. And this example is from Cambridge, UK. There is a famous Indian restaurant in Cambridge, UK. I visited that restaurant quite often to eat food. And once the owner of that restaurant, he showed one manuscript in his possession to a colleague of mine. And this colleague, he went through the manuscript and found that it was written in a language in Malayalam, written in something called Manipravala. This is how you get access to manuscripts, accidentally also, and also through the collections that people have in their households. I gave you this example, a stark example. You get a manuscript in a restaurant. That's the least probable place where you will get a manuscript, but you can get a manuscript in a restaurant of this kind. And this is not catalog. This is not part of any collection. So this will go in the private collection of this friend of mine. I have in my own private collection several manuscripts, which I will not be able to show the photographs of to you right now because I'm working on those texts and soon they will get published. How do you preserve the manuscripts? That's another important topic. So there are some traditional methods where these manuscripts were preserved by bundling them in the red cloths and then putting those red cloths in cupboards. I used to visit a lot of manuscript libraries in search of certain texts, and I always used to come across these red cloths, and they were constantly, spread the chemical on to keep the insects away. And so you had a typical smell of these red cloths as well as the manuscripts. Those who know Marathi language, they will here remember, and I would like to remind them of a very famous story written by a Marathi writer named The Ma Mirasdar. The title of the story is Shivaji's Hastakshar. And in this particular story, a boy who is caught in between his teacher and his historian, researcher, grandfather, who is working on manuscripts, yellow pages, piwale kagad, as he calls it, and how this boy suffers, and the search for historical truth, namely the handwriting of Chhatrapati Shivaji, and how this develops into a full story. That's a must read, and some of it also has direct impact on what we are studying right now, manuscriptology, how manuscripts are read and what are the conditions in which they are preserved. Now, in modern age, we use technological methods and digitization happens, and that is how we preserve the manuscripts. This is an example of a red cloth in which a manuscript is preserved in the traditional fashion. Now the time changes, as I said to you, and I'll cite again one of my own examples. There is an institution called Rajasthan Oriental Research Institute situated in various places in Rajasthan, for example, in Jodhpur, in Jaipur, in Alwar, and so on. I have myself visited all these places. This is a story of Jodhpur branch of RORI, Rajasthan Oriental Research Institute. I went there to get some manuscript copy in 1995, and I came across all such red cloths, collections, and I was asked to search for the manuscript that I want myself. There was also a huge pile of uncatalogued manuscript, and I myself went through those uncatalogued manuscripts and found out whatever I wanted. Huge important information I got. I went there once again in 2016, and I received a huge culture shock, because in 1995, when I went there, I had to spend at least a week, to get my manuscript, the manuscript that I wanted. I had to myself go through several processes. In 2016, when I went there to search for some more manuscripts, and to get the CD of the soft copy of the earlier got manuscripts, I got a shock because I got the copies of those manuscripts in the form of a CD within 2 hours. This was possible because all those manuscripts got digitized. There are various technologies that are used in digitizing these manuscripts. Let me also narrate to you my own personal experience of Allama Iqbal Library in Srinagar. When I visited this particular library in 2005, the group of researchers from IGNCA New Delhi, they were already doing a lot of digitization of manuscripts, and they preserved quite a lot of manuscripts. And that is a huge, huge work that they did, that they need to be complimented for obvious reasons. And now you can get those invaluable texts in the form of digitized versions, and you can carry out your research with digital copies. Digital copies also help you understanding small details of ligatures by zooming, expanding the size, and so on. So that's a big help for researchers. In order to do the digital preservation, there are certain guidelines provided by UNESCO. Guidelines for digitization projects for collections and holdings in the public domain, particularly those held by libraries and archives. This was published in 2002 in the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, IFLA, and International Council on Archives, ICA. What do they say? They say that physical handling is one of the most destructive things that can happen to a fragile object. One of the best ways to preserve it is to limit physical access to it, and therefore digitization is the best way to preserve manuscripts. So the purposes of digitization are to increase access. This is the most obvious and primary reason, where there is thought to be a high demand from users, and the library or archive has the desire to improve access to a specific collection. Then to improve services to an expanding users group by providing enhanced access to the institution's resources with respect to education, which is also a lifelong learning experience. Also to reduce the handling and use of fragile or heavily used original material and create a backup copy for endangered material such as brittle books or documents. To give the institution opportunities for the development of its technical infrastructure and staff skill capacity from a desire to develop collaborative resources, sharing partnerships with other institutions to create virtual collections and increase worldwide access. I'm quoting these from those documents from UNESCO. To seek partnerships with other institutions to capitalize on the economic advantages of a shared approach, and to take advantage of financial opportunities, for example, the likelihood of securing funding to implement a program or of a particular project being able to generate significant income. Now, this last aspect is quite not taken too seriously in Indian context and as well as libraries abroad, because I tell you later on, institutions who make their manuscripts available digitally online. You can look at the manuscript copy online, like the UPenn, University of Pennsylvania manuscript collection. If you want to look up for some manuscript, they also have pictures published online. So you can go through them and decide whether you want it or not. Now, there are some other institutions which will send you the copies, and then you'll be able to work on them. Of course, monetary benefit is considered as a less important factor in these transactions. There are some institutions, however, I will not name them, who do try to get some monetary benefit out of it, and they therefore try to restrict the access of manuscripts. Like, for example, 25% of the manuscript will be accessible to them. That is one of the conditions they put. What are the repositories of manuscripts in India and abroad? So National Mission for Manuscripts New Delhi is the nodal institution in India, which provides you quite a lot of information. The recent information about the Mongolian Kanjur manuscripts that were, reworked on and republished, that is an important information. And various such informations are available in this. There are also digital catalogs available on the site of National Mission for Manuscripts. There are many institutions in India and abroad who hold beautiful collections of manuscripts. Like, for example, there is in Mumbai, there is an Asiatic Society of Mumbai. In Pune, there is Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute. These are some of the institutes eminent for these collections in Maharashtra. There are, as I mentioned to you, Rajasthan Oriental Research Institute. There are various ORIs. Oriental Research Institute, Mysore, for example, holds huge collections of manuscripts. Asiatic Society of Bengal in Kolkata, Asiatic Society of Mumbai, Lal Bhai Dalpat Bhai Institute in Ahmedabad, Adyar Institute in Chennai, Government Oriental Manuscript Library in Chennai, and Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts in Delhi. These are some sample institutes. There are lots of other institutes which have these collections, and scholars. There is Ranbir Sanskrit University in Jammu that also holds quite a lot of manuscripts, and so on. Outside India, as I mentioned to you, University of Pennsylvania, Cambridge University, Vienna, Austrian Academy of Sciences, Vienna, they hold valuable collections. Austrian Academy of Sciences, Vienna is equally important because it is through this institute that we can get access to the manuscripts, Indian manuscripts in China, because they have some collaboration with them, and also probably in Pakistan. Now, they all have made, most of these institutes have made the digital versions of the manuscripts available, at least the institutions abroad. India is also developing towards that, and soon we shall find that all the institutions will have all their manuscript collections digitized. Now, how to catalog a manuscript? There are two ways of doing it. There are to provide a hand list, basic information, and then to provide a detailed catalog, also known as descriptive catalog, in which information related to the date of the composition of the work, date of the manuscript written, the name of the author, information of the author, the place where the author composed the manuscript, the contents of the text, the contents of the manuscript, and so on. The pushpikas, for example, all these details are provided in the descriptive catalogs. That gives you extremely important, valuable information about that particular manuscript. Now, there was a catalogus catalogorum that was prepared in the early 20th century, prepared by a scholar called Offrecht. Later on in the 20th century, new catalogus catalogorum was also prepared. It is still going on, and these resources are now also available online. in the digital form, in the searchable form. One should take advantage of these facilities to search for various manuscripts. So, preparing a digital catalog of the manuscript collection is the need of the hour. Various institutions need to do this. There are some who have already done it, some who need to take steps in doing this. And even the general public should now also ask for manuscript libraries to come up with the digital catalogs. Let us now go to the third aspect of manuscriptology, namely how to publish a manuscript. In order to publish one manuscript, you need to edit that manuscript properly. In order to edit it, it needs first of all to be transcribed. If the script is, let's say, Devanagari, and we can read Devanagari fluently, still you will have to transcribe it into some other format. If the manuscript is written in various other scripts, the ones that I showed to you, Grantha or Sharada or Nevari or Nandinagari or Malayalam, Telugu, Kannada, n number of Bengali, n number of scripts. So if they are written in those scripts, they need to be transcribed. So here I remember one story, a story of an eminent professor who retired teaching Sanskrit in the United States of America, Professor Madhav Deshpande. In one of his publications, where he publishes a Pali commentary on a celebrated text of Milinda Thakatha, he narrates the experience of his own transcribing a particular manuscript in his travel from India to United States on a ship. In those days when he traveled in 1968, the ship took some time, maybe a month or two, I think, to reach United States. And in that period, he finished transcribing that Burmese manuscript, and which he subsequently published, say, 30 years after, approximately. So the manuscript needs to be transcribed first. Then if you have more than one copies of the manuscript, you need to collate the manuscripts. After collating, you need to find out the reliable version that is available to you. There are variations that happen. The variations can happen because of various reasons. There could be psychological errors, there could be some conscious errors, and so on. For example, there is a beautiful verse in Uttar Ramacharitam in which Ratri Revam Veram Seet is the last line, and some people say there is Evam, Ratri Revam Veram Seet. There is one more reading. Which one is beautiful? One may decide that Ratri Revam is the beautiful one than Ratri Reva, and that can become the reading in the text. Okay, so in this way, this is an example of variations occurring in a particular text. There are various reasons why variations can happen, and one needs to tackle with them and provide a reliable version and then publish the edition. The edition could be diplomatic or critical or also non-critical. What is a diplomatic edition? A diplomatic edition is a published book which is exactly equal with the manuscript content. And a critical edition is the one which is prepared after many manuscripts that are collected and collated and compared, and interrelation is established, and readings are selected, and then the edition is prepared. This is an example of a diplomatic edition. Jinendra Buddhi's Pramana Samuchaya Tika, chapter 1, part 1 is critical edition and part 2 is a diplomatic edition. This is based on the Chinese material accessible to this institute in Vienna. So they have also done the diplomatic edition as well as a critical edition. The most famous examples of critical edition in Indian scenario are these. Mahabharata, for example, the critical edition of Mahabharata published by the Bhandakar Oriental Research Institute, which was prepared in the span of 50 years, starting from 1917 and closing on coming to an end on 1966. And still, I mean, some work is still going on, but the edition proper was published in 1966, where the then President of India was invited to release the entire edition and so on. I remember. So Mahabharata is of this kind, where various manuscripts from various parts of India written in different scripts were collected, and they were collated, and then their readings were selected, interrelation was established, and then this critical edition was prepared. In this critical edition, the groups of manuscripts were shown in the fashion in which they are shown on this slide. Ur Mahabharata, which is the original Mahabharata, that must have been composed by these streams. There must be a northern stream and there must be a southern stream. And then these streams are further classified under various heads, where manuscripts belonging to a particular script belong to a particular group based on the variations. And you will find explanations to these in the Prolegomena to the Mahabharata edition written by the first ever editor, the legend Vishnu Sakharam Sukthankar. In this Prolegomena, you will find what is the difference, the northern edition and the southern edition of Mahabharata. So various episodes which are popularly known, which are very juicy, they seem to be omitted in one version and seem to be present in another version, and so on. There are, say, for example, details of five Pandavas, how old they are, and so on. So Subhadra Harana, for example. These are the episodes where you find lots of variations in these two branches. And then the editors based their decisions on these divisions, and they came up with the edition. I was talking of the critical edition. Ramayana is one such epic which also has received this treatment, serious treatment at the hands of the Oriental Research Institute in Vadodara. Recently, Professor Vasanta Kumar Bhatt has done a painstaking study of Abhijnana Shakuntalam and has compared and has collected various versions of this extremely important drama, culturally important play written by Kalidas, and has concluded that the Kashmiri version and the Devanagari version, they differ drastically in terms of the longevity and the short version of it. And he has also published his edition comparing all the recensions and all the versions available. And his decisions are extremely noteworthy, and we must study these seriously. So the art of critically editing texts continues. And we are working on the critical edition of the Kashika Vritti, the oldest complete commentary on the great text of Panini. So that will appear soon. Now, in modern times, we use technology also in the process of editing, where we use cladistic methods. So they are also known as phylogenetic systematics. The technique is used to determine the evolutionary relationships between different species. The cladistic method interprets each character state transformation implied by the distribution of shared character states among taxa as a potential piece of evidence for grouping. This is the basic philosophy. We use this, and then we use phylogenetic softwares to create various to create interrelations between manuscripts. So we have developed a tool called a textual history tool, also available on this site, which uses these methodologies, and we are able to predict, we are able to show the trees and show that the manuscripts are interrelated in this or that fashion. So this, we have also published some articles related to the textual history tool. This is also made available public. And if time permits, I may like to also show this tool, give you a live demo of this tool as well. And also there are some other tools like classical text editor and so on. So digital tools also add quite a lot of value to the process of editing the manuscript and publish them. So this is a very, very important area for research for younger scholars. My advice to younger scholars, and by this, after this advice, I will stop, I will conclude. The advice would be, this is a very rich area of research. Young scholars should devote themselves to manuscriptology, to discover hidden treasures, to collect, first of all, the manuscripts. There are many manuscripts which are not yet collected. They still are part of individual collections. They were transmitted from one generation to the another. They need to be discovered and they need to be stored. Then they need to be collected and then catalogued. Even for cataloging, you have lots of digital tools available. We prepared the catalogs of one collection in an institution in Mumbai, and we also have prepared the digital tool with the help of which we can catalog that manuscript collection. And then, of course, comes the task of editing them and publishing them. By doing this, I think the younger researchers would do immense service to our own country by bringing to light the hidden treasure of our intellectual past. Otherwise, we keep just seeing those treasures in cinemas and rejoice. This would be a good chance for younger scholars to actually bring that treasure in public. This is my humble appeal to younger scholars. And with this appeal, once again, I will thank the authorities of Samskruti Samvardhana and Samshodhana Pratishthan, Professor Kala Acharya Madam and Dilip Karambedkar ji. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and here I will stop. Thank you. I will, as I said to you, stop sharing the screen for a while, and we'll take you to the tool, and then we'll come back. I mean, we'll start sharing it again. I have already opened the tool for you, and now let me see if this works. This is our tool. Yeah. Is the, oh, sorry, the screen is not yet visible. Sorry.
Right.
Let me share the screen once again. Huh? Is the screen visible?
Yes.
So
Yes,
this
it is.
Called, yeah, textual history analysis tool, Granthetihasa Darshaka Yantram, where we have a data entry mode, text manuscript and sutra, etc. For example, Kashika Vritti and manuscript, these are manuscripts. And if we enter 111 or some such other sutra, this will give you
different levels. So congratulations to the entire team for doing this. And it will be amazing to actually see it. I mean, to do this for other texts as well.
Absolutely. So it is available online.
Right.
So one can use it for doing other texts also.
Which means to say that as an individual, you will have to first be a part of NMM. You will have to register for NMM first, and then,
No,
or
no,
how is it?
this is not part of NMM. This is developed by us, IIT Bombay. Use classical text editor you can use, or you can use our tool, textual history tool, to do your further processing to bring that manuscript to light. I will stop here and would request now everybody to take your questions with me offline, if possible, because now I will request Kala Acharya Madam to conclude. I thank Ruchita Madam also for this coordination. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Atharva, please unmute, ma'am. Dr. Kalacharya.
Yes, yes.
Ma'am.
Hello.
Yes. Yes.
I'm not unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Mallar, Professor Dr. Malhar Kulkarni, for such a scientific, methodical speech. Actually, there is nothing to comment upon because it was a wonderful treat for all of the listeners, because it was such a scientific subject. You made it so easy for everybody. Just what I want to say, that nowadays the students, they don't seem so serious about learning about going to manuscripts, because for the want of the knowledge of the script. So Brahmi script or Kharoshthi script or Granthas or Sharada or even Modi. So there the facilities should be made available for them to learn these scripts at different places.
Yes.
There are some centers which do serious works in this direction, but it's not so easy for students to approach there. This is one thing. Another thing is that as there are different ways of also of writing these scripts. No, Brahmi is written in the way we write Devanagari from left to right, whereas Kharoshthi is written exactly in the opposite way. So
Yes.
with all these characteristics, they should learn all these scripts.
Yes,
And
Madam, just 1 second, Madam. I remember when we were together in Kazakhstan,
Yes,
there were some pictures shown to us
yes, yes.
of some monuments that were found in Azerbaijan, which had engravings in Devanagari, composed by some merchants over there, and some other scripts also. So students should be encouraged to discover such things. There is a huge treasure all over the world.
Yes. And with that institute only, we are having collaboration now with Laura. You know Laura.
Yes.
And Laura Erekesheva, she has some collaboration with us, and we hope that we will go ahead in that for a particular type of research.
Yeah.
And second thing is that about describing the date of a manuscript, I just want to point out that even sometimes colophon is there, but sometimes in that colophon the exact year or shaka etc. is not mentioned, and then one has to find out the date of that particular author, and then with external and internal evidences, this thing has to be done very carefully.
Yes.
Just sir, one thing which about Patha Veda you have quoted, Ratri Reva Veramsit, maybe that the listeners are not very much acquainted with. I will just quote it, that what Rama says to Sita is kimapi mandam asakti yogat avirilita kapolam jalpatora kramena अशिथिल परिरंभ व्यापृतैकैक दोषणो अविदित गतयामा रात्रिरेव व्यरंसी. What Malhar Kulkarni told us, that if there is Patha Bheda slight also, then it makes tremendous change in the meaning, because Rama is telling to Sita in this verse that we were talking to each other in very gentle tones and in embrace, close embrace. We were just talking randomly. But when we were talking like that, avidata gatayama, we didn't know how the moments pass. Ratri reva veransit, only right night only.
Tomorrow we have yet another beautiful session. I'm sure all of us who've been listening throughout have heard Dr. Sriram Agashe earlier when he presented the first lecture of Swami Vivekananda, the fountainhead of cultural renaissance in India. And tomorrow he'll be presenting the second lecture in this series. So I request and I invite all of you to be present tomorrow. The session will, as always, start at 11. So you can use the same link, continue to use the same link to join us at 10:50. Sir, I request you also, in case you have the time in your busy schedule, to do visit the sessions that are there. The schedule has been mailed to you already,
Sure,
and
yes.
do be present whenever time permits. So
Yeah,
once
yeah,
again,
sure.
sure, yeah.
Now,
Once-
may I now request you, can I leave? Just 1 second. Huh? Hello, Vaijanti? No, I'm
yes, sir, you must be busy, so you can leave definitely. Thank you so much once again on behalf of everyone.
thank you, madam.
Ruchita, 1 minute.
Yes.
Just to inform Malhar Kulkarni sir,
Yeah.
sir, Laura Erekeshava had given a beautiful speech in this forum
Yeah.
on Asian art.
Yeah,
So we will send you the link.
please send me the link.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Atharva, you
Please.
can you can put up the screen, put up the topic for tomorrow in case it's there.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So this is the topic once again for those of us who want to recall it. Swami Vivekananda, the fountainhead of cultural renaissance in India, part 2. So that happens tomorrow at 11 a.m. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Dhanyavadaha. Namo Namaha.